150 years, 37 missing girls, all between the ages of 16 and 22. All remarkably beautiful. The only common thread connecting these disappearances around Mirror Lake was perhaps the most puzzling detail of all. After each girl vanished, the body of an elderly woman would be discovered along the lake's shoreline. The local authorities of Moonhaven had long attributed these deaths to natural causes, assuming the aged women had simply succumbed to the harsh mountain winters or various ailments common to their advanced years. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from all corners of the world. Now settle in, perhaps with a warm drink, and let's begin tonight's journey into one of history's most puzzling mysteries. The village of Moonhaven, nestled against the shores of Mirror Lake, like a precious gem set in silver. The alpine community had flourished for centuries, sustained by fishing, forestry, and the occasional traveler drawn by the lake's legendary beauty. The water itself seemed almost supernatural in its clarity, reflecting the surrounding peaks with such perfection that visitors often found it difficult to distinguish where reality ended and reflection began. It was this very quality that had given the lake its name, though local folklore suggested far more mystical origins for the mirror-like surface. Village elders spoke in hushed tones of ancient magic that dwelt within the lake's depths, energies that had drawn practitioners of the mysterious arts for generations beyond memory. Whether these tales held any truth remained a matter of speculation, but the lake's unusual properties were undeniable to anyone who spent time along its shores. The most recent disappearance had shaken Moonhaven to its core. Rose Whitmore, 18 years old and possessed of the kind of natural beauty that made strangers pause in admiration, had vanished without explanation during what should have been a routine evening walk. Her family had discovered her absence when she failed to return for dinner, launching a search that continued through the night and into the following days without yielding any trace of the missing young woman. Rose had been the baker's daughter, beloved throughout the community for her gentle nature and willingness to help anyone in need. Her disappearance struck particularly hard because she represented everything good and pure about Moonhaven's close-knit society. The villagers searched every trail, every cabin, every possible hiding place where she might have sought shelter, but found nothing that might explain her sudden absence from their midst. 3 days after Rose's disappearance, a fisherman made a grisly discovery along the lake's eastern shore. The body of an elderly woman lay partially concealed among the reeds, her appearance suggesting she had passed away from natural causes rather than any form of violence. The discovery itself was not unprecedented, as the remote location occasionally attracted wanderers who became lost or overwhelmed by the harsh mountain environment. What puzzled the authorities was the complete absence of any identification or personal effects that might reveal the woman's identity. Her clothing was well made but unremarkable, offering no clues about her origins or circumstances. Most strangely, despite her obviously advanced age, the woman's features suggested she had once possessed considerable beauty, though the ravages of time had long since claimed whatever attractiveness she might have enjoyed in her youth. Dr. Marcus Henley, Moonhaven's physician and coroner, conducted his examination with the thoroughness that had made him invaluable to the community over his 30 years of service. His findings only deepened the mystery surrounding the discovery. The woman appeared to have been approximately 80 years of age, though certain aspects of her physical condition seemed inconsistent with that assessment. The woman's hands showed none of the wear patterns typical of a lifetime of labor, suggesting a background of privilege or leisure that contrasted sharply with her anonymous death beside the lake. Her teeth, while yellowed with age, remained remarkably intact and well-formed. Most puzzling of all were her eyes, which retained a clarity and depth that seemed almost youthful, despite the aged features surrounding them. Dr. Henley's report documented these anomalies while acknowledging that he could offer no satisfactory explanation for them. The woman's death appeared entirely natural, resulting from heart failure that was entirely consistent with her apparent age. Yet something about the entire situation felt wrong in ways that the educated physician could not articulate even to himself. As word of the discovery spread through Moonhaven, the older residents began sharing stories that had been passed down through generations of families. These tales spoke of similar incidents stretching back over a century and a half, always following the same pattern. A beautiful young woman would disappear, followed by the discovery of an unidentified elderly woman's body near the lake. The stories had been dismissed as folklore by most practical-minded villagers, explained away as coincidences that took on supernatural significance only through repetition and embellishment. After all, remote mountain communities had always experienced their share of mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths. The harsh environment and isolated location provided ample opportunity for tragedy without invoking otherworldly explanation. Yet the consistent pattern described in these tales was difficult to ignore, particularly when examined alongside official records that Dr. Henley began researching with growing fascination. Church burial records, constabulary reports, and family chronicles all contained references to similar incidents, documented with enough detail to establish a clear historical pattern extending back to the. During this time of uncertainty and growing unease, a new arrival in Moonhaven began attracting attention from the village's more observant residents. The woman called herself Evangeline Ashford, claiming to be a traveling artist drawn by the lake's legendary beauty and seeking inspiration for a series of landscape paintings. Her story seemed perfectly reasonable, as Mirror Lake had long attracted artists, writers, and other creative individuals seeking to capture its ethereal qualities. Evangeline appeared to be approximately 25 years of age, possessed of a striking beauty that made her the subject of admiring glances wherever she went in the small community. Her features held a classical perfection that seemed almost too flawless to be entirely natural, while her manner of dress and speech suggested considerable education and refinement. She took rooms at the village's modest inn, paying in advance with gold coins that bore unfamiliar markings. What made Evangeline's presence particularly noteworthy was not her beauty or her apparent wealth, but rather certain inconsistencies that became apparent to those who paid careful attention to her statements and behavior. She seemed to possess knowledge of local customs and landmarks that would be unusual for a first-time visitor, occasionally making references to places and events that predated her apparent age by decades. Mrs. Helena Crawford, the innkeeper's wife who prided herself on remembering every guest who had stayed at their establishment, found herself troubled by nagging feelings of familiarity whenever she looked at Evangeline. The sensation was maddeningly elusive, like trying to recall a half-remembered dream, but it persisted despite Mrs. Crawford's inability to place exactly where she might have encountered their mysterious guest before. Other villagers reported similar experiences, describing Evangeline as somehow familiar despite being certain they had never met her previously. These feelings were particularly strong among the community's elderly residents, who found themselves drawn to study her features with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Yet none could articulate what specifically triggered these responses, or provide any rational explanation for their persistent sense of recognition. Evangeline's daily routine quickly established a pattern that the observant villagers began to notice and discuss among themselves. She would rise early and spend her mornings sketching along the lake's shore, working with remarkable skill to capture the play of light across the water's surface. Her artistic abilities were genuinely impressive, producing landscapes that seemed to glow with an inner luminescence that perfectly captured the lake's mystical qualities. Her afternoons were typically spent in the village proper, visiting shops and engaging in conversation with residents who were eager to share local history and folklore with such an appreciative audience. Evangeline displayed particular interest in stories about the lakes, legendary properties, and the mysterious disappearances that had marked the area's history for so many generations. Most intriguingly, Evangeline seemed especially drawn to accounts of the young women who had vanished over the years. Listening with rapt attention as village elders recounted tales that had been passed down through their families, she asked thoughtful questions about these incidents, displaying a level of knowledge about historical details that seemed remarkable for someone who claimed to be hearing these stories for the first time. Her evenings were spent in solitude, with villagers reporting that they often saw lights burning in her room well into the night. Occasionally, residents taking late walks would glimpse her figure moving along the lake's shore in the moonlight, though she always claimed to be simply enjoying the peaceful atmosphere when questioned about these nocturnal wanderings. As Evangeline's stay in Moonhaven extended beyond the few days originally mentioned, some residents began to express concerns about her true purposes in their community. The timing of her arrival, so soon after Rose Whitmore's disappearance, struck several villagers as suspiciously coincidental. Others pointed out that the discovery of the elderly woman's body had occurred only after Evangeline's presence in the village. Dr. Henley found himself particularly intrigued by their mysterious visitor, not least because of her apparent interest in his medical practice and the various cases he had handled over the years. Evangeline had visited his office under the pretense of seeking treatment for minor ailments, but her questions consistently drifted toward topics related to aging, longevity, and the physical changes that occurred as people grew older. During one such visit, Evangeline had examined a collection of medical texts that lined Dr. Henley's office walls, displaying knowledge of anatomical and physiological concepts that seemed far beyond what one might expect from someone with her claimed background in the arts. When questioned about this knowledge, she had laughed off his observations, attributing her familiarity with medical terminology to extensive reading and a naturally curious disposition. Yet Dr. Henley's trained eye detected something unsettling about Evangeline's appearance that he struggled to define precisely. Her skin possessed a quality that seemed almost luminescent, with a smoothness and elasticity that appeared too perfect for someone who claimed to spend considerable time outdoors pursuing her artistic endeavors. Her eyes held depths that suggested experiences far beyond what her apparent age should have allowed. Most disturbing of all was the way Evangeline looked at the young women of Moonhaven, studying them with an intensity that made Dr. Henley profoundly uncomfortable despite his inability to articulate exactly what troubled him about her behavior. There was something predatory in her gaze, an assessment that seemed to catalog and evaluate rather than simply admire. As the first chapter of this mysterious tale drew to a close, the pieces of a larger puzzle were beginning to arrange themselves in patterns that suggested far more sinister purposes behind Evangeline's presence in Moonhaven. The beautiful stranger who had arrived claiming artistic inspiration was revealing herself to be something far more complex and potentially dangerous than anyone in the village had initially suspected. The disappearance of Rose Whitmore had been only the beginning, the first move in a game whose rules were known only to Evangeline herself. The elderly woman found dead beside the lake represented evidence of something that the rational minds of Moonhaven's residents were not yet prepared to accept or understand. Mirror Lake held secrets that stretched back through generations, mysteries that connected the present tragedy to a pattern of horror that had been repeating itself for over a century and a half. Evangeline Ashford was not merely a visitor to this remote mountain community. She was the architect of its recurring nightmare, a predator who had perfected her methods through decades of practice. The stage was set for revelations that would challenge everything the villagers thought they knew about the nature of beauty, age, and the price that some individuals were willing to pay to maintain their youth and attractiveness. The mystery of the 7 missing girls was about to yield its secrets, though the truth would prove far more horrifying than anyone in Moonhaven could have imagined. The beautiful stranger who walked among them carried with her knowledge of dark arts that had sustained her unnatural longevity for 2 centuries, and she had come to Mirror Lake with purposes that would soon become terrifyingly clear. The game was beginning once again, and Evangeline Ashford intended to win by any means necessary. The woman who now called herself Evangeline Ashford had not always possessed the supernatural abilities that allowed her to walk through centuries unchanged. 200 years earlier, in the spring of 1823, she had been born as Lady Catherine Blackwood, the youngest daughter of a minor English nobleman whose family had fallen on hard times. Her story began not with magic or mystery, but with the same vanity and fear of aging that had consumed countless women throughout history. Lady Catherine had been blessed with extraordinary beauty, from an early age possessing the kind of ethereal loveliness that made poets weep and artists beg for the privilege of capturing her likeness. Her porcelain skin seemed to glow with inner light. Her golden hair cascaded in perfect waves that required no artifice to achieve their lustrous perfection, and her emerald eyes held depths that seemed to promise secrets worth any sacrifice to discover. This remarkable beauty had been both blessing and curse for young Catherine, opening doors that would have remained forever closed to someone of her family's modest circumstances, while simultaneously creating expectations and pressures that shaped every aspect of her existence. She learned early that her appearance was her greatest asset, the key to escaping the genteel poverty that had claimed so many noble families in the aftermath of England's economic upheavals. Through her beauty, Catherine had secured advantageous marriages for her sisters and attracted the attention of wealthy suitors, who might elevate her family's fortunes through generous dowries and beneficial business arrangements. She became accustomed to being the center of attention at every social gathering, the standard against which other young women measured themselves, the prize that ambitious men competed to win. Yet as Catherine approached her 25th birthday, she began to notice subtle changes that filled her with mounting terror. The first sign had been barely perceptible, a tiny line at the corner of her left eye that appeared only when she smiled broadly. Most people would have dismissed such a minor imperfection as insignificant, but to Catherine it represented the beginning of the end of everything that defined her worth and identity. The obsession that followed consumed her completely, driving her to spend hours each day examining her reflection from every possible angle, searching for additional signs of the aging process that would inevitably destroy her beauty and with it her power over others. She consulted physicians, apothecaries, and beauty specialists, seeking remedies that might slow or reverse the natural progression of time across her features. Traditional treatments proved frustratingly inadequate for Catherine's perfectionist standards. Expensive creams and lotions might temporarily improve her skin's texture, but they could not address the fundamental issue of cellular aging that would continue regardless of any external interventions. Exercise and proper nutrition could maintain her figure, but they offered no solution to the inevitable appearance of wrinkles and the gradual loss of the luminous quality that made her beauty so remarkable. Desperate for more effective solutions, Catherine began exploring increasingly unconventional approaches to preserving her appearance. She sought out practitioners of alternative medicine, folk healers who claimed knowledge of ancient secrets, and eventually, individuals whose methods ventured into territories that conventional society would have considered deeply unsavory if not outright dangerous. Her search eventually led her to Madame Corvina, a mysterious woman who operated from a shop in London's most disreputable district, offering services that attracted clients willing to pay any price for results that legitimate practitioners could not provide. Madame Corvina claimed to possess knowledge passed down through generations of her family, techniques that drew upon sources of power that predated Christian civilization. The shop itself was unlike anything Catherine had ever encountered, filled with specimens preserved in glass jars, books written in languages she could not identify, and instruments whose purposes she dared not contemplate too closely. The air itself seemed charged with energies that made her skin tingle and her pulse quicken. while shadows appeared to move independently of their supposed sources. Madame Corvina herself defied easy categorization, appearing to be perhaps 40 years of age, but possessing eyes that suggested far greater experience and knowledge than her apparent years should have allowed. Her manner was both welcoming and unsettling, offering solutions to Catherine's problems while making it clear that such assistance would come with costs that extended far beyond mere monetary payment. The conversation that followed would determine the course of Catherine's existence for the next 2 centuries. Madame Corvina listened with apparent sympathy as Catherine described her fears about aging and her desperate desire to maintain her beauty indefinitely. The older woman nodded knowingly, indicating that such concerns were far from unusual among her clientele. The solution that Madame Corvina proposed was both elegant and horrifying in its simplicity. Youth and beauty were forms of energy that could be transferred from one person to another through properly conducted rituals, allowing individuals with sufficient knowledge and determination to maintain their appearance indefinitely by drawing upon the vitality of others. The process was not without risks and limitations, Madame Corvina explained, with clinical detachment. The energy transfer could only be accomplished between individuals of the same gender, and the donors had to possess sufficient youth and beauty to make the exchange worthwhile. Most importantly, the effects were temporary, requiring periodic renewal through additional transfers to maintain the desired results. Catherine listened to these explanations with growing excitement tempered by apprehension about the moral implications of what was being proposed. The idea of stealing youth from other women troubled her conscience, yet the alternative of accepting natural aging seemed far more terrifying than any ethical concerns about the methods required to prevent it. The first lesson in the ancient arts took place in Madame Corvina's private chambers, located in the basement beneath her shop, where the walls were lined with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when observed directly. Catherine learned to perceive the subtle emanations of life energy that surrounded all living beings, developing sensitivity to the variations in intensity that distinguish the young and beautiful from the ordinary and aged. The training required months of practice before Catherine could reliably detect and manipulate the energies that would allow her to perform the youth transfer ritual. She learned to identify the specific types of energy that governed physical appearance, distinguishing between the forces that maintained skin elasticity, hair luster, and the overall vitality that created the impression of youthful beauty. Most challenging of all was learning to establish the psychic connections necessary to draw energy from unwilling donors. The process required intense concentration and emotional detachment, suppressing natural empathy and compassion in favor of cold calculation about the practical benefits of each potential transfer. Catherine's first successful ritual took place on a foggy November evening in 1823, with her own lady's maid, Elena, serving as the unwitting donor. The young woman, barely 17 years old and possessed of the kind of fresh beauty that Catherine coveted, had been chosen specifically for her isolation and vulnerability. The transfer itself had been surprisingly gentle, accomplished through seemingly innocent physical contact that allowed Catherine to establish the necessary connection without arousing Elena's suspicions. As the energy flowed between them, Catherine felt a rush of vitality and renewal that exceeded her most optimistic expectations, while Elena experienced what appeared to be a brief fainting spell. The results became apparent over the following days as Catherine observed her reflection with growing satisfaction. The tiny lines around her eyes had vanished completely. Her skin had regained the perfect smoothness of her teenage years, and her hair seemed to glow with renewed luster. The transformation was everything she had hoped for and more. Elena's condition deteriorated rapidly over the same period, though the changes were gradual enough to avoid immediate suspicion. The girl's vibrant complexion became pale and dull. Her lustrous hair lost its shine and began showing premature gray streaks, and her energetic nature gave way to chronic fatigue that she attributed to various minor ailments. Within a month, Elena appeared to have aged decades. Her youthful beauty replaced by the worn appearance of someone who had endured years of hardship and suffering. Her family attributed these changes to overwork and stress, never suspecting that their daughter's deterioration was the direct result of supernatural intervention. The success of her first ritual filled Catherine with intoxicating satisfaction, proving that she had found the solution to her deepest fears about aging and loss of beauty. Yet even as she celebrated her triumph, she began to notice the temporary nature of the effects that Madame Corvina had warned her about. After approximately 3 months, subtle signs of aging began to reappear, requiring Catherine to seek out additional donors to maintain her enhanced appearance. This pattern would continue throughout the decades that followed, driving her to develop increasingly sophisticated methods for identifying suitable candidates and conducting transfers without attracting unwanted attention. The realization that she would need to repeat the process indefinitely led Catherine to make fundamental changes in her lifestyle and identity. She could not remain in English society without eventually arousing suspicions about her failure to age naturally, forcing her to adopt new names and backgrounds as circumstances required. Over the following decades, Catherine became expert at reinventing herself, moving between different countries and social circles, while perfecting her methods for identifying and accessing potential donors. She learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated strong life energy, developing an almost supernatural ability to assess the suitability of potential candidates from brief observation. The woman who had once been Lady Catherine Blackwood gradually disappeared into history, replaced by a succession of identities that allowed her to continue her predatory activities without detection. She became skilled at creating convincing backstories and documentation that supported whatever persona she chose to adopt in each new location. By the time she arrived in Moonhaven as Evangeline Ashford, she had perfected her techniques through nearly 2 centuries of practice. She had learned to space her activities to avoid creating obvious patterns, to select victims whose disappearances would be attributed to natural causes, and to manage the physical evidence in ways that prevented authorities from recognizing the supernatural nature of her crimes. Mirror Lake had attracted her attention because of the unique properties that made it ideal for conducting the youth transfer rituals. The ancient energies that dwelt within the lake's depth amplified the effects of her magic, allowing her to achieve more dramatic and longer-lasting results than were possible in ordinary locations. The 47 young women who had disappeared around Mirror Lake over the past century and a half represented the accumulated cost of Catherine's quest for eternal beauty and youth. Each had contributed their vitality to maintaining her supernatural preservation, their own lives cut tragically short to fuel her selfish desires. As Evangeline settled into her rooms at Moonhaven's Inn, she was already planning the next phase of her endless cycle of predation. The village's young women would be carefully evaluated and ranked according to their suitability as donors, with the most promising candidates selected for the rituals that would extend her unnatural longevity for years to come. The mystery that had puzzled Moonhaven's residents for generations was about to reveal its true nature, though the revelation would come too late to save the beautiful young women who had already caught Evangeline's predatory attention. The centuries-old cycle of beauty theft was beginning another turn, and the master practitioner who orchestrated it felt confident that she could continue her activities indefinitely without ever facing consequences for her actions. The lake that had given the community its name would soon serve its true purpose as the stage for rituals that defied natural law, while the woman who had learned to steal youth itself prepared to claim new victims in her endless quest to remain forever young and beautiful. Evangeline Ashford had developed her victim selection process into an art form refined through 2 centuries of practice. As she walked through the streets of Moonhaven each day, her trained eye cataloged every young woman she encountered, assessing their potential value for her supernatural purposes with the cold precision of a merchant evaluating precious gems. Her criteria had evolved considerably since those early clumsy attempts in London society. Youth was essential, but not merely chronological age. She sought the specific vitality that burned brightest in individuals who had not yet been worn down by life's hardships or disappointments. Beauty was equally important, though Evangeline had learned to recognize the deeper qualities that transcended conventional attractiveness. The ideal candidate possessed what Evangeline thought of as untouched luminescence, a quality that manifested in clear skin that seemed to glow from within, eyes that sparkled with curiosity and hope, and an overall energy that suggested unlimited potential waiting to be fulfilled. These qualities could not be faked or artificially enhanced. They represented the genuine article that made the youth transfer rituals so remarkably effective. During her first week in Moonhaven, Evangeline had identified 5 young women who met her exacting standards. Each represented a different aspect of the ideal victim profile she had developed through decades of experience, offering unique advantages that would serve different purposes in her carefully planned campaign. Sarah Chen stood out immediately as the most promising candidate. The 19-year-old daughter of a Chinese merchant who had settled in Moonhaven to establish a trading post, Sarah possessed an exotic beauty that combined Eastern and Western features in ways that created truly striking results. Her lustrous black hair caught light like polished obsidian, while her delicate features held a perfection that seemed almost sculptural in its precise proportions. More importantly, Sarah radiated the kind of concentrated life energy that Evangeline had learned to recognize and value above all other considerations. The girl moved with unconscious grace that suggested perfect health and vitality, spoke with intelligence that indicated an active and engaged mind, and carried herself with confidence that had not yet been undermined by the disappointments that inevitably accumulated with age and experience. Sarah's family situation made her particularly suitable for Evangeline's purposes. As recent immigrants to Moonhaven, the Chens had not yet established the deep community connections that might lead to intensive searches if their daughter disappeared. Their focus on building their trading business meant they often worked long hours that limited their supervision of Sarah's daily activities. The second candidate was Maria Santos, an 18-year-old whose Spanish heritage had blessed her with the kind of warm, golden beauty that reminded Evangeline of Mediterranean sunshine. Maria worked as a seamstress in the village's modest tailoring shop, displaying artistic talents that suggested the creative energy that Evangeline had found particularly valuable in previous rituals. Maria's gentle nature and quiet demeanor made her popular throughout the community, but also meant that she rarely drew the kind of intense attention that might make her disappearance immediately noticeable. She lived with elderly grandparents who were increasingly frail and dependent on her care, a situation that would provide convenient explanations for any changes in her routine or availability. Isabella Reed represented a different type of appeal, combining the fresh beauty of 17 years with the kind of robust health that came from a lifetime of outdoor activities. The daughter of a local ranger, Isabella knew the mountain trails better than anyone else her age and possessed physical strength and endurance that would make the energy transfer particularly powerful and long-lasting. Her independent nature and love of solitary hiking provided perfect opportunities for Evangeline to arrange private encounters without arousing suspicion. Isabella's family was accustomed to her extended absences as she explored the wilderness, meaning that several days might pass before anyone became concerned about her whereabouts. Catherine Moore, 16 years old, and possessed of the kind of innocent beauty that seemed to glow with inner purity, represented the youngest viable candidate that Evangeline had identified. The girl's sheltered upbringing as the daughter of the village pastor had preserved a quality of untouched perfection that was increasingly rare in Evangeline's experience. Catherine's religious background also suggested the kind of spiritual energy that could enhance the mystical aspects of the youth transfer ritual. Evangeline had discovered through previous experiments that individuals with strong faith traditions often possessed unique qualities that made their life force particularly compatible with the ancient magic she employed. The final candidate was Lily Thompson, a 20-year-old whose mature beauty suggested she was approaching the upper limits of Evangeline's preferred age range. However, Lily's work as the village school teacher had preserved an intellectual vitality that compensated for her advancing years, while her dedication to education indicated the kind of focused mental energy that could provide interesting variations in the transfer process. Lily's position in the community also offered strategic advantages, as her sudden disappearance would likely be attributed to opportunities for advancement in larger towns or cities. Young teachers frequently moved between positions in search of better circumstances, providing a plausible explanation that would prevent intensive local investigations. Having identified her potential victims, Evangeline began the delicate process of establishing relationships that would allow her to isolate and manipulate each candidate without arousing suspicion. Her approach varied according to each girl's personality and circumstances, demonstrating the psychological sophistication she had developed through centuries of predatory experience. For Sarah Chen, Evangeline adopted the role of a sophisticated art patron interested in commissioning paintings that would capture the unique beauty of Moonhaven and its residents. She visited the Chen family's trading post regularly, expressing admiration for Sarah's natural grace and suggesting that she would make an ideal subject for portrait work that could bring recognition to both the artist and model. Sarah responded eagerly to this attention, flattered by Evangeline's sophisticated manner, and excited by the possibility of participating in artistic endeavors that seemed far more glamorous than the routine commercial activities that dominated her family's daily life. The girl's enthusiasm made her increasingly willing to meet with Evangeline privately to discuss the proposed portrait sessions. With Maria Santos, Evangeline presented herself as a wealthy traveler seeking custom garments that would be suitable for the mountain climate while maintaining the elegant style she was accustomed to in more cosmopolitan settings. Maria's pride in her needlework made her eager to take on such a prestigious commission, especially when Evangeline offered payment that exceeded anything the local market could provide. The fitting sessions required for these custom garments provided perfect opportunities for private meetings that appeared entirely legitimate to anyone who might observe them. Maria's concentration on her work also made her vulnerable to the subtle psychological manipulation that Evangeline employed to gradually gain the girl's trust and dependence. Isabella Reed proved more challenging to approach due to her independent nature and weariness of strangers, requiring Evangeline to develop a more elaborate strategy. She positioned herself as a fellow lover of nature, who sought guidance for hiking expeditions that would allow her to sketch the area's most scenic locations. Isabella's expertise in wilderness travel and her genuine enthusiasm for sharing knowledge about the local environment eventually overcame her initial caution. She agreed to serve as Evangeline's guide for increasingly remote and isolated locations, never suspecting that these expeditions were actually scouting missions for potential ritual sites. Catherine Moore's religious background required the most delicate handling, as any approach that seemed inappropriate or morally questionable would likely be reported to her pastor father. Evangeline adopted the persona of a fellow Christian seeking spiritual guidance and companionship during her temporary stay in Moonhaven. Catherine's genuine faith and desire to help others made her receptive to Evangeline's requests for Bible study sessions and prayer meetings that gradually evolved into more personal conversations about faith, doubt, and the challenges of maintaining spiritual purity in an increasingly secular world. These discussions created the emotional intimacy that Evangeline needed to manipulate the girl's trust. Lily Thompson's intellectual nature provided the opening that Evangeline exploited most skillfully. She presented herself as an educated woman, interested in supporting educational initiatives in rural communities, offering to donate books and materials that would enhance the village school's limited resources. Lily's dedication to her students and her hunger for intellectual stimulation made her eager to engage with someone who could discuss literature, philosophy, and pedagogical theories at levels that were impossible with other village residents. These scholarly conversations gradually evolved into personal relationships that Evangeline could exploit when the time came for action. The approach that Evangeline employed with each candidate was carefully calibrated to create maximum psychological dependency while maintaining plausible explanations for their private meetings. She understood that successful predation required not just physical access to her victims, but emotional control that would prevent them from seeking help or resisting when the crucial moment arrived. Her first selection fell upon Sarah Chen, whose combination of exotic beauty and concentrated life energy made her the most valuable target for Evangeline's immediate needs. The groundwork for Sarah's capture had been laid through weeks of careful relationship building that positioned Evangeline as a trusted mentor and artistic patron. The opportunity came when Evangeline suggested a special portrait session that would take place beside Mirror Lake during the golden hour just before sunset, when the lighting would be perfect for capturing Sarah's natural beauty. The location was isolated enough to prevent interruption while providing the mystical energies that would enhance the upcoming ritual. Sarah arrived at the appointed location wearing her finest dress and carrying herself with the excitement of someone who believed she was participating in something wonderful and artistic. Evangeline had prepared the site carefully, arranging mirrors and reflective surfaces around the shoreline in patterns that would focus and amplify the lake's natural magical properties. The conversation that preceded the ritual was designed to put Sarah completely at ease while gradually introducing concepts that would make the upcoming experience seem like a natural extension of their artistic collaboration. Evangeline spoke of capturing not just physical beauty but the inner essence that made each person unique, describing techniques that would preserve Sarah's loveliness for posterity. As the sun began to set, and the light took on the golden quality that Evangeline had promised, she began the ritual that would transfer Sarah's youth and beauty to herself. The process was accomplished through what appeared to be innocent artistic direction, with Evangeline positioning Sarah precisely where the mystical energies were strongest, while maintaining the fiction that they were simply creating exceptional portrait art. The mirrors arranged around the shoreline began to glow with soft light that seemed to emanate from their surfaces rather than reflecting the surrounding environment. Sarah noticed this phenomenon with wonder rather than alarm, interpreting it as part of the magical artistic process that Evangeline had described. The actual energy transfer was conducted through seemingly casual physical contact. As Evangeline adjusted Sarah's pose and positioning, the girl experienced the drain as a gradual feeling of relaxation and contentment, never realizing that her life force was being systematically drawn away to feed her companion's supernatural needs. As the ritual reached its conclusion, Sarah's appearance began to change in ways that would have been horrifying to witness if observed by someone who understood what was actually taking place. Her lustrous hair lost its shine and began showing streaks of premature gray. Her smooth skin developed lines and age spots that aged her decades in minutes, and her bright eyes became dull and tired. Sarah herself remained conscious throughout the process, but experienced it as a dreamy, disconnected state that prevented her from fully comprehending what was happening to her. By the time the transfer was complete, she had the appearance of someone in her 70s or 80s, though her mind remained trapped in confusion about her condition. Evangeline, meanwhile, experienced the intoxicating rush of renewed vitality that made all her efforts worthwhile. Her skin tightened and glowed with perfect health. Her hair became more lustrous than it had been in months, and she felt the surge of energy that would sustain her supernatural preservation for the months to come. The elderly woman who had been Sarah Chen was left beside the lake to face whatever fate awaited her, while Evangeline returned to the village with her enhanced beauty and carefully constructed explanations for Sarah's absence. The trading post would be told that their daughter had been offered opportunities for artistic training in distant cities, a story that seemed plausible given Evangeline's sophisticated background. The first hunt had been completed successfully, but Evangeline knew that this was only the beginning of her activities in Moonhaven. The other candidates she had identified would soon face similar fates as she worked through her carefully planned campaign of supernatural predation. The master of the hunt had claimed her first victim, and the ancient cycle of beauty theft was continuing its inexorable progression. Mirror Lake had witnessed another tragedy in its long history of supernatural crimes, while the woman who orchestrated these horrors prepared to select her next target from among Moonhaven's remaining young beauties. The success of Sarah Chen's transformation had filled Evangeline with renewed confidence in her abilities and heightened anticipation for the campaigns that would follow. The energy she had absorbed from the young woman would sustain her for several months, but Evangeline had learned through centuries of experience that the most efficient approach involved conducting multiple rituals in succession while she remained in a location suited to her supernatural need. Mirror Lake's unique properties made it an ideal base of operations for an extended harvesting period, allowing her to achieve more dramatic and longer-lasting results than would be possible in ordinary locations. The ancient energies that dwelt within the lake's depths seemed to respond to her presence, growing stronger with each ritual and making subsequent transfers increasingly powerful. 3 weeks after Sarah's disappearance, Evangeline turned her attention to Maria Santos, the gentle seamstress whose warm beauty and artistic nature made her an ideal second candidate. The approach Evangeline had developed through their previous interactions provided the perfect foundation for arranging the private meeting that would seal Maria's fate. The custom garments that Maria had been creating for Evangeline required a final fitting session to ensure perfect measurements and styling. Evangeline suggested that this appointment take place at sunset beside Mirror Lake, where the natural lighting would allow for the most accurate assessment of how the clothing would appear in various conditions. Maria accepted this unusual request without suspicion, flattered by Evangeline's attention to detail, and eager to complete a commission that represented the most prestigious work she had ever undertaken. The payment Evangeline had promised would allow Maria's family to improve their circumstances significantly, making the seamstress determined to ensure absolute perfection in her craftsmanship. The ritual that claimed Maria's youth and beauty followed a similar pattern to Sarah's experience, though Evangeline refined her techniques based on lessons learned from the previous transfer. The mirrors arranged around the lake shore created an even more elaborate pattern designed to focus the mystical energies with greater precision and intensity. Maria's artistic sensibilities made her particularly responsive to the aesthetic beauty of the ritual setting, interpreting the supernatural phenomena as natural effects enhanced by Evangeline's sophisticated understanding of light and composition. The seamstress felt honored to participate in what seemed like an elaborate artistic collaboration. As the energy transfer progressed, Maria experienced the same dreamy detachment that had characterized Sarah's ritual, though her creative nature allowed her to appreciate the strange beauty of the process even as her life force was being systematically drained away. Her final moments of youth were spent in wonder at the magical effects surrounding her, never fully comprehending their true purpose. The transformation left another elderly woman beside Mirror Lake while Evangeline returned to the village with enhanced beauty that made her even more striking than before. The accumulated energy from 2 young women had created a luminescence that seemed almost supernatural, though the villagers attributed her radiant appearance to the beneficial effects of mountain air and artistic inspiration. Maria's disappearance was explained through carefully planted stories about opportunities for advanced training with fashion designers in distant cities, plausible explanations that prevented intensive searches while her family mourned what they believed was a temporary separation that would ultimately benefit their daughter's career prospects. 2 months later, Evangeline selected Isabella Reed as her third victim. Drawn by the ranger's daughter's robust health and the unique vitality that came from her deep connection to the natural world, Isabella's wilderness knowledge and physical strength promised to provide energy of exceptional quality and longevity. The approach required careful planning due to Isabella's independent nature and familiarity with the local environment, factors that could complicate the isolation necessary for conducting the ritual safely. Evangeline proposed an ambitious hiking expedition to a remote location that Isabella had mentioned during their previous conversations, a hidden valley that few people had ever visited. Isabella's enthusiasm for sharing her knowledge of the wilderness overcame any caution she might have felt about venturing into such an isolated location with someone she had known for only a few months. The proposed expedition seemed like a wonderful opportunity to explore photography and sketching possibilities in one of the area's most pristine and beautiful settings. The ritual site that Evangeline had selected was even more remote than the lakeshore locations she had used previously. Surrounded by towering peaks that created a natural amphitheater filled with concentrated mystical energies, the mirrors she arranged in this sacred space seemed to resonate with the mountain environment, creating effects that surpassed anything she had previously achieved. Isabella's connection to nature made her particularly sensitive to the supernatural forces that Evangeline was manipulating, allowing for a more complete and efficient energy transfer than had been possible with the previous victims. The robust vitality that the young woman had accumulated through years of outdoor activity provided Evangeline with renewed strength that would sustain her for an extended period. The transformation of Isabella followed the same general pattern as the previous rituals, though the mountain setting created unique effects that enhanced the mystical atmosphere. The young ranger's gradual aging occurred against a backdrop of natural beauty that seemed to amplify both the wonder and the tragedy of what was taking place. Isabella's family accepted explanations about extended expeditions to distant locations, a cover story that was entirely consistent with their daughter's adventurous nature and expertise in wilderness exploration. The absence would likely go unquestioned for weeks or months, providing Evangeline with additional time to complete her planned activities in Moonhaven. The fourth victim was Catherine Moore, the pastor's daughter whose innocent beauty and spiritual energy offered unique qualities that Evangeline had learned to value in her most sophisticated rituals. Catherine's religious background required more delicate handling, but also promised to provide the kind of purified life force that created the most dramatic and lasting effects. The approach Evangeline employed with Catherine built upon the spiritual mentoring relationship they had developed through their Bible study sessions and prayer meetings. She proposed a special meditation retreat beside Mirror Lake, where the natural beauty and peaceful atmosphere would enhance their spiritual practices and deepen Catherine's connection to divine grace. Catherine's genuine faith and trust in Evangeline's spiritual guidance made her eager to participate in this proposed retreat, viewing it as an opportunity for spiritual growth that would strengthen her relationship with God and enhance her ability to serve others in the community. Her father gave enthusiastic approval for the retreat, considering Evangeline's sophisticated theological knowledge a valuable influence on his daughter's spiritual development. The ritual that claimed Catherine's youth incorporated elements of religious ceremony that made the supernatural aspects seem like natural manifestations of divine presence. Evangeline's knowledge of mystical traditions allowed her to create an experience that felt deeply spiritual to Catherine, even as her life force was being systematically drained away. Catherine's transformation was perhaps the most complete that Evangeline had achieved, with the young woman's spiritual energy providing a quality of renewal that exceeded purely physical benefits. The pastor's daughter's deep faith had created the kind of purified life force that enhanced not only Evangeline's appearance, but also her mental clarity and supernatural ability. The explanation for Catherine's absence involved a calling to missionary work in distant regions, a story that seemed entirely consistent with her religious dedication and desire to serve others. Her father interpreted this development as confirmation of his daughter's spiritual maturity and divine purpose, never suspecting the true fate that had befallen her. The final victim was Lily Thompson, the village school teacher, whose intellectual vitality and mature beauty represented the culmination of Evangeline's carefully planned campaign. Lily's advanced age made her a borderline candidate, but her mental energy and dedication to education suggested unique qualities that could provide interesting variations in the transfer process. The approach with Lily built upon their shared intellectual interests and Evangeline's promised support for educational initiatives in the village. She proposed a special evening of scholarly discussion beside Mirror Lake, where they could explore philosophical questions in a setting that would inspire deep thinking and meaningful conversation. Lily's hunger for intellectual stimulation and appreciation for Evangeline's sophisticated knowledge made her eager to participate in this proposed evening of philosophical exploration. The school teacher viewed it as a rare opportunity for the kind of academic discourse that was impossible to find among other village residents. The ritual that concluded Evangeline's Moonhaven campaign incorporated the accumulated power from all the previous transfers, creating effects that surpassed anything she had previously achieved in a single location. Lily's intellectual energy provided a unique component that enhanced Evangeline's mental abilities, while completing the physical transformation that would sustain her for years to come. By this point, however, Evangeline's activities had begun to attract the attention of Dr. Henry Blackwood, whose medical training and analytical nature made him uniquely qualified to recognize the patterns that other villagers had missed. The physician had been documenting the disappearances and the discovery of elderly women's bodies with growing concern about connections that seemed to defy rational explanation. Dr. Blackwood's observations had revealed inconsistencies in the official explanations for the disappearances that troubled his scientific mind. The timing of the events, the ages and descriptions of the missing women, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the elderly bodies found beside the lake suggested patterns that could not be attributed to coincidence.
Most disturbing of all was the physician's growing certainty that Evangeline Ashford was somehow connected to these events, though he could not articulate the nature of that connection in terms that would be credible to other villagers. Her presence in Moonhaven coincided perfectly with the acceleration of disappearances, while her apparent immunity to aging seemed to mock natural law.
Dr. Blackwood began conducting discreet investigations into Evangeline's background, seeking evidence that might support his growing suspicions about her true nature and purposes. His medical expertise allowed him to recognize anomalies in the elderly bodies that suggested unnatural causes, though he lacked the knowledge to understand the supernatural forces that had created these conditions. As Evangeline completed her planned campaign and prepared to depart Moonhaven with her accumulated harvest of stolen youth, she became aware that Dr. Blackwood's investigations were approaching dangerous territory. The physician's scientific approach and persistent questioning posed the first serious threat to her activities that she had encountered in decades. The success of her Moonhaven campaign had exceeded even her optimistic expectations, providing her with enough stolen vitality to sustain her supernatural preservation for several years, while enhancing her abilities beyond previous levels. Yet the growing scrutiny from Dr. Blackwood reminded her that even perfectly executed plans could be compromised by unexpected variables. Evangeline's preparations for departure included careful arrangements to ensure that her trail would be impossible to follow once she left the village. The identity of Evangeline Ashford would disappear as completely as all her previous personas, leaving no evidence that could connect her to the events that had occurred in Moonhaven. The 5 young women who had vanished from the village would be remembered as casualties of various believable circumstances, their true fate hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed deception that would prevent anyone from understanding the supernatural predation that had claimed their lives. Their stolen youth would fuel Evangeline's continued existence for years to come, while she moved on to new hunting grounds where fresh victims awaited her attention. As the 4th chapter of this dark tale drew to its conclusion, Evangeline stood poised to escape justice once again, her centuries of experience having taught her to anticipate and counter any threats to her continued activities. The woman who had mastered the art of stealing youth itself was about to demonstrate that even the most persistent investigator could not match 200 years of practice in evading consequences. Yet, Dr. Blackwood's investigations had planted seeds of understanding that would continue to grow even after Evangeline's departure, creating possibilities for future recognition and resistance that the confident predator had not fully anticipated. The cycle of beauty theft was approaching a turning point that would determine whether centuries of successful predation could continue indefinitely, or whether knowledge and determination might finally prove stronger than supernatural evil. The accumulated energy from 5 young women, had transformed Evangeline into something that transcended ordinary human beauty, creating an almost ethereal perfection that seemed to glow with inner light. Yet even as she basked in the intoxicating effects of her successful campaign, she knew that her time in Moonhaven was drawing to a close. Dr. Blackwood's persistent investigations had created the first genuine threat to her activities that she had encountered in decades. However, before departing, Evangeline had identified one final opportunity that was too valuable to abandon. Emma Goldwater, the 17-year-old daughter of the village's most prosperous merchant family, possessed the kind of extraordinary beauty that occurred perhaps once in a generation. Her luminous blonde hair caught sunlight like spun gold. Her porcelain features seemed carved by a master sculptor, and her blue eyes held depths that suggested unlimited potential waiting to be fulfilled. More importantly, Emma radiated the concentrated life energy that Evangeline had learned to recognize and prize above all other considerations. The girl's sheltered upbringing and devoted family had preserved a quality of innocent perfection that was increasingly rare in Evangeline's experience, promising to provide the most powerful and lasting energy transfer she had ever attempted. The approach required careful planning due to Emma's prominent family position and the protective attention she received from parents who were well aware of their daughter's exceptional beauty. Unlike the previous victims, Emma could not simply disappear without triggering intensive searches and investigations that might uncover evidence of Evangeline's supernatural activities. The solution came through Evangeline's established reputation as a sophisticated art patron with connections to cultural institutions in major cities. She approached the Goldwater family with a proposal that seemed like an extraordinary opportunity for their daughter's advancement. A scholarship to study at a prestigious academy for young ladies, sponsored by wealthy patrons who had been impressed by reports of Emma's beauty and accomplishments. The scholarship offer included immediate departure for the academy, where Emma would receive education and cultural training that would prepare her for marriage into the highest levels of society. The opportunity seemed too valuable to refuse, particularly when Evangeline provided documentation and references that appeared to confirm the legitimacy of the offer. Emma herself was thrilled by the prospect of experiencing life beyond Moonhaven's limited horizons, while her parents saw the scholarship as the fulfillment of their highest aspirations for their daughter's future. The family's enthusiasm made them eager to complete the arrangements quickly, before such a remarkable opportunity might be withdrawn. Evangeline's plan called for Emma to accompany her on the first stage of the journey to the academy, with the understanding that they would travel together as far as the nearest major town before Emma continued with other transportation arrangements. This approach would provide the isolation necessary for conducting the final ritual while maintaining plausible explanations for both their departures from Moonhaven. As the day of departure approached, Dr. Blackwood's investigations reached a critical juncture that threatened to expose Evangeline's activities before she could complete her plans. The physician had begun connecting historical records of similar incidents, recognizing patterns that stretched back over generations and suggested the involvement of a single individual who had somehow avoided aging for an impossible length of time. Dr. Blackwood's medical training allowed him to analyze the mysterious elderly bodies found beside Mirror Lake with greater precision than previous investigators had achieved. His examinations revealed biological anomalies that contradicted conventional understanding of aging processes, suggesting the involvement of forces that challenged scientific explanation. Most significantly, the physician had obtained historical photographs and artistic portraits from Moonhaven's archives that showed remarkable similarities between Evangeline Ashford and women who had visited the village under different names at various points over the past century. The resemblances were too strong to be explained by coincidence, yet the implications seemed to defy rational belief. Armed with this evidence, Dr. Blackwood attempted to alert village authorities and Emma's family about the potential danger posed by Evangeline's continued presence in their community. However, His warnings were dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination combined with stress from his medical responsibilities during a difficult period for the village. The lack of credible support for his suspicions left Dr. Blackwood with limited options for preventing what he was increasingly certain would be another tragedy. His scientific training made it difficult for him to accept supernatural explanations for the patterns he had identified. Yet no conventional theory could account for the evidence he had accumulated. As Emma prepared for her departure with Evangeline, Dr. Blackwood made the desperate decision to follow them discreetly, hoping to gather additional evidence or intervene if his worst fears proved justified. His hand was to maintain distance while observing their activities, documenting whatever occurred for future presentation to authorities who might be more receptive to evidence gathered through direct observation. The final ritual took place at a location that Evangeline had carefully selected for its combination of mystical properties and isolation from potential witnesses. The site was a natural amphitheater formed by ancient rock formations beside Mirror Lake's most remote shoreline, where geological forces had created concentrations of the earth energies that enhanced her supernatural abilities. Emma had been told that this location was a traditional stopping point for travelers, where they would rest and prepare for the next stage of their journey. The girl's excitement about her upcoming adventure made her eager to participate in whatever preparations Evangeline deemed necessary, trusting completely in her sophisticated companion's experience and judgment. The ritual setup was the most elaborate that Evangeline had ever attempted, incorporating mirrors, crystals, and other focusing elements arranged in complex patterns designed to channel and amplify the lake's mystical energies. The configuration represented the culmination of 2 centuries of experimentation and refinement, creating a setup capable of conducting the most powerful energy transfer possible. Dr. Blackwood arrived at the ritual site just as Evangeline was beginning the final phase of the ceremony, positioning himself where he could observe the proceedings while remaining concealed behind the rock formations. What he witnessed challenged every aspect of his rational worldview, yet provided undeniable confirmation of the supernatural theories he had been reluctant to accept. The physician watched in horrified fascination as Evangeline conducted what appeared to be an elaborate magical ritual, manipulating energies that became visible as shimmering distortions in the air around Mirror Lake. Emma seemed entranced by the proceedings, responding to Evangeline's directions with dreamlike compliance that suggested some form of mystical influence. As the energy transfer began, Dr. Blackwood observed Emma's gradual transformation from vibrant youth to premature aging, her golden hair losing its luster and turning gray, her smooth skin developing lines and age spots that added decades to her appearance in minutes. The process was both mesmerizing and terrifying, representing a violation of natural law that surpassed anything in his medical experience. Evangeline's corresponding transformation was equally dramatic, her already remarkable beauty enhanced to supernatural levels as she absorbed Emma's stolen vitality. The physician could see her skin tightening and glowing with perfect health, her hair becoming lustrous, and her entire form radiating the energy that had been taken from her young victim. Dr. Blackwood's attempt to intervene came too late to save Emma, whose transformation was already irreversibly advanced by the time he emerged from concealment. His medical knowledge told him that the elderly woman now lying beside the lake had only minutes of life remaining, her body having been aged beyond its capacity to sustain basic biological functions. Evangeline's response to Dr. Blackwood's intervention was surprisingly calm, as if she had been expecting such a confrontation and had prepared for this possibility. She acknowledged his persistent investigations with something approaching respect, recognizing in him the kind of methodical intelligence that had enabled him to uncover patterns that had remained hidden from others for decades. The conversation that followed provided Dr. Blackwood with confirmation of theories that had seemed too fantastic to believe. As Evangeline explained the supernatural techniques that had sustained her unnatural longevity for 2 centuries, her matter-of-fact description of youth theft and energy transfer was delivered with the clinical detachment of a scientist discussing research findings. Evangeline made no attempt to deny her activities or justify them through appeals to higher purposes, instead treating her crimes as natural expressions of survival instincts that transcended conventional morality. Her explanation emphasized the evolutionary advantages that her supernatural abilities provided, positioning herself as a superior form of life that was entitled to sustain itself through whatever means proved effective. Dr. Blackwood's medical oath compelled him to attempt treatment for Emma despite the apparent hopelessness of her condition, though his efforts proved futile against the supernatural forces that had ravaged her body. The girl's final moments were spent in confusion about her circumstances, her mind struggling to comprehend the transformation that had claimed her youth and beauty. With Emma's passing, Evangeline's ritual was complete, providing her with enough stolen vitality to sustain her supernatural preservation for several years, while enhancing her abilities to levels she had never previously achieved. The accumulated energy from 6 young women had created a reserves of power that would allow her to experiment with even more ambitious projects in future locations. Dr. Blackwood's discovery of Evangeline's true nature posed a problem that required immediate resolution, yet she had no intention of eliminating the physician through direct violence. Such an action would create complications that might interfere with her planned departure, while also representing a deviation from the careful methods that had protected her activities for so long. Instead, Evangeline employed psychological techniques, refined through centuries of practice, manipulating Dr. Blackwood's rational mind to create doubt about his own perceptions and memories of the events he had witnessed. The supernatural energies she had absorbed enhanced her mental abilities, allowing her to influence his thoughts in ways that would make him question the reality of his experience. The manipulation was subtle, but effective, creating mental confusion that would prevent Dr. Blackwood from presenting coherent testimony about Evangeline's activities even if he attempted to report what he had witnessed. His memories of the ritual would remain intact but would seem increasingly dreamlike and unreliable, particularly when he tried to describe them to skeptical listeners. Evangeline's departure from Moonhaven was accomplished with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized all aspects of her campaign. The identity of Evangeline Ashford would disappear as completely as all her previous personas, leaving no trace that could connect her to the events that had occurred beside Mirror Lake. The official explanation for Emma Goldwater's fate involved a tragic accident during the journey to her academy scholarship, with her body never recovered despite extensive search efforts. The story was plausible enough to prevent intensive investigations, while the family's grief made them reluctant to pursue inquiries that might prove emotionally devastating. Dr. Blackwood's attempts to report his observations were indeed dismissed as the product of stress and overwork, with colleagues attributing his fantastic claims to the psychological pressure of dealing with so many unexplained deaths in a short period. His reputation for scientific rationality actually worked against him, as the supernatural theories he proposed seemed completely inconsistent with his previously demonstrated commitment to empirical evidence. In the bustling metropolis of New Avalon, a woman calling herself Victoria Sterling had established herself as one of the city's most sought-after art consultants, specializing in the acquisition and authentication of classical paintings for wealthy collectors. Her apparent age of 25 concealed 2 centuries of accumulated experience and knowledge that made her uniquely qualified to distinguish genuine masterpieces from even the most sophisticated forgeries. Victoria's extraordinary beauty attracted attention wherever she went, though she had learned to manage such interest with the skill that came from decades of practice. Her flawless features and luminous skin suggested excellent health and careful attention to personal maintenance, while her cultured manner and extensive knowledge marked her as someone who moved comfortably in the highest levels of society. The apartment she maintained in New Avalon's most exclusive district was filled with mirrors, arranged in patterns that seemed decorative but actually served more specialized purposes related to her ongoing supernatural preservation. The mystical properties that had drawn her to Mirror Lake could be replicated artificially, though the process required careful preparation and considerable expense. Victoria's current identity was supported by documentation that would withstand the most intensive scrutiny, created through networks of contacts that she had cultivated over decades of careful relationship building. Her apparent background included education at prestigious institutions and employment with respected cultural organizations, all confirmed by records that had been meticulously falsified or obtained through supernatural influence. The social circles in which Victoria moved provided access to information about the personal lives and circumstances of potential victims, allowing her to identify candidates who met her exacting standards while possessing the isolation necessary for safe predation. Her position as an art consultant created opportunities for private meetings with young women who possessed the beauty and vitality she required. Yet even as Victoria enjoyed the fruits of her successful Moonhaven campaign, she was already planning future activities that would extend her unnatural longevity for decades to come. The techniques she had perfected through 2 centuries of practice continued to evolve, incorporating new methods and technologies that enhanced her effectiveness while reducing the risks associated with her supernatural activities. The woman who had once been Lady Catherine Blackwood, who had lived as dozens of different identities across multiple continents, who had claimed hundreds of young lives in service of her obsession with eternal beauty, remained as committed to her dark purposes as ever. The perfect crime she had committed in Moonhaven was merely the latest chapter in a story that would continue as long as she could find new victims to feed her insatiable hunger for stolen youth. Mirror Lake remained as beautiful as ever, its pristine waters reflecting the surrounding mountains with the same ethereal clarity that had given it its name. Yet the village of Moonhaven would never fully recover from the predator who had walked among them, leaving behind a legacy of loss and mystery that would haunt the community for generations to come. The beauty thief of Mirror Lake had claimed her victories and moved on to new hunting grounds, her perfect crime complete and her supernatural preservation sustained through the stolen vitality of 6 innocent young women. The cycle would continue in new locations, with fresh victims, unless someone could find the knowledge and courage necessary to challenge a predator who had perfected her methods through 2 centuries of successful predation. Dr. Henry Blackwood lived out the remainder of his life, troubled by memories that seemed increasingly unreal, carrying knowledge that no one would believe about the supernatural evil that had visited his community. His documentation of the events was dismissed as fiction, filed away in archives where it would gather dust for decades before some future investigator might recognize its significance. The legend of the beautiful stranger who had brought tragedy to Moonhaven became part of local folklore, a cautionary tale told to warn against trusting appearances and reminded listeners that evil could wear the most attractive masks. Yet the true scope of the horror that had occurred remained hidden, protected by supernatural manipulation and the inherent difficulty of believing in magic within a rational world. Somewhere in New Avalon, Victoria Sterling smiled as she reviewed portfolios of potential clients, her enhanced beauty radiating the stolen vitality of her Moonhaven victims, while she planned the next phase of her eternal campaign. The perfect crime had been committed. The beautiful predator had escaped all consequences, and the cycle of youth theft continued its inexorable progression through another century of carefully orchestrated evil.